So it's officially DNC week, and I'm sure Karl Marx would be proud. Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama got rid of their Joe problem, but they replaced it with a coconut whose only policy outline to date involves price fixing. Communism, but with good vibes, is the theme of Chicago this week. Well, that plus tens of thousands of anti Semitic and pro Hamas protesters. But if the pro-terrorism thing isn't your thing, you can always save yourself a trip to Planned Parenthood and get a free abortion or vasectomy courtesy of the DNC, Kamala Coconut, and Tampon Tim. A mobile health clinic, they call it. So basically Uber for population control. How progressive, how brat. But even an abortion on wheels won't be big enough to hide Kamala from media that, to its credit, is at least getting an eensy-weensy bit more critical, at least of her economic aspirations. Her light-on-details, communist-inspired price-fixing plan is so bad, even her biggest cheerleaders in left-wing media, they can't cover for it. Although I do love this headline from The Atlantic. Harris's plan is economically dumb, but politically smart, with the subheading, "The vice president's campaign promises make no sense to people acquainted with supply and demand, but they might win elections." Oh, that's so good to know. Her plans make no sense to people who understand the economy, but oh well, because they might help her win so she can destroy the country. Here she is making the case to elect Donald Trump.
As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food. We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed. But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high. A loaf of bread cost 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. Many of the big food companies are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, others still aren't.
Kamala can't laugh her way through this one, not through economic policy, but I'm guessing she will surely try. But my next guest literally wrote the book on Kamala, and if anyone can peel back the coconut, so to speak, it's him. Joining me now is political reporter and author of Amateur Hour, Kamala Harris in the White House, Charlie Spiering. Charlie, you literally wrote the book on Kamala. I have so many questions for you, but I think I have to just start from the start. What made you want to write a book on Kamala, and how difficult was it to cover the current vice president, potential president?
Yeah, well, I first started writing the book last year, and at the time I was really taking a look at, there were so many people writing books about Joe Biden, but at the same time I was like, Joe Biden is in the twilight era of his political career, and there's a very real possibility that Kamala Harris could be the 47th president of the United States, either through, him stepping down from a campaign or, in fact, winning the presidency and then stepping down and installing Kamala Harris as his successor. So at that point, I was really just interested in what kind of person is Kamala Harris and how did she get where she is today, and what kind of president would she be? And wow, suffice to say, I'm glad I wrote the book. It's becoming a very must-read part of the campaign as people are kind of frantically trying to understand who this person is ahead of the election. That's just in a number of days.
Yeah, she's still trying to decide who she is too, which is interesting. I've cited your book on my show before because some of the things that you wrote about to me are just so important for the American people to understand. One being the way that her staff feels about her, felt about her, has felt about her for pretty much her entire career, and also her lack of preparedness and really her lack of desire to be prepared. I want to go into both of those things, but some of the things that you wrote about her staff and the way that they feel about her, you went way back to really her early career, and people didn't like her then. What did they tell you, and were they excited to tell you about it, or did you have to really dig to get people to give you the dirt on Kamala?
Yeah, I obviously had to do a lot of digging, but there was also a lot of decent reporting done on what kind of boss she was as vice president. But even going back to the Senate and talking to people in the Senate, they said she had a reputation of, as high overturning of staff. And if you've been to Washington, you know kind of what it's like to work in Washington. You can have these terrible bosses, and if you do, word gets around DC. Do not work for this person. Terrible, hard to work with, thin-skinned, unprepared, and then also blaming staff when things go wrong instead of taking responsibility. There were so many occasions where she would snap at even staffers of the opposite party who were just in her way. She would snap at them, and a lot of history of foul language and just no patience for anybody. So that's kind of the reputation she developed. She even had the same reputation back in California, where she was an attorney general and a district attorney.
Yeah, people that were interning for her, they've came back with broken spirits. I mean, and listen, I think that today's youth are really thin-skinned, and they probably need to toughen up a little bit and learn that sometimes words aren't the worst thing that can happen to you. But still, I mean, when somebody has a pattern of this, I think it's interesting to dig into. We know from Open the Books that she had a 92% staff turnover rate, which is a lot. And I mean, this didn't end. This has been throughout her career and as her time as vice president. But I have to ask you, as someone who's studied her very closely, when you see her on the campaign trail and you see her laughing and you see her joking and you see her putting on this performance of joy and love and light and laughter, do you think that's genuine, or do you think it's an act?
I think 100%. She's very surprised to see herself in the position that she's in with 100. She really struggled during her first 3 years as vice president. She didn't have any major accomplishments to talk about or campaign on. And people didn't necessarily want to speak to her or interview her or even see her. That's kind of why she kind of left the campaign trail, the traditional campaign trail of getting on the stump and talking to voters, and just spending time on a college tour. She spent most of the fall and the spring talking to college students in liberal location universities. Really, the safest space you can get as a candidate for president, also a Democratic candidate for president. So really healthy for her. She sort of developed and scripted her talking points. But even now, just as she's sort of launched her new campaign, and to have it be accepted with open arms from both Democrats and the media, I think there's a genuine surprise and a little bit of joy at how smoothly this thing is going.
Well, we knew that the media was going to, in large part, coddle her. She's the new shiny thing. They really hate Donald Trump. Maybe that's starting to change just a little bit. I have been impressed by the rightful criticism of her economic plan, what we know of it. I mean, the first thing you're going to introduce is price fixing when people are already labeling you a radical, and that's the first thing you want to talk about is price fixing. I mean, that to me was a giant misstep. Or maybe it's right in line with what she wants to portray and convey to the American people. I'm not sure. But when you write and you title a book Amateur Hour, that tells me that you discovered in your research and in talking to people close to her that she is not only an amateur because, she's a rookie in this role, but that she doesn't take her job very seriously. I know that you wrote about how she just had a propensity for being unprepared. She didn't seem to want to learn or to take the time to study and learn, and that's why we get the word salads. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, during her vice presidency, it was very clear to aides that she needed a lot more media training. And you're familiar with television news and the amount of intense talking point preparation that every politician goes into when they go into a hard interview with a respected journalist. And famously the Lester Holt interview right after she visited Guatemala, when he asked her why she hadn't been to the border. That was one of the situations where she had received media training before that and had a prepared answer. But when it came time to deliver that answer, she just spun off on her own with this whole talking point. Well, I haven't been to Europe either. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course, we take the border seriously. And that kind of devolved into a disaster. That was one sign that, even Biden's aides were like, whoa, she is just not ready to be on camera. We saw a lot fewer interviews, serious news interviews. And you can definitely see that's why they're avoiding any of these serious interviews so far in the campaign. They just can't risk having another one of those moments.
What do you make of her nervous laughter? She laughs inappropriately, inappropriate times. She's known for that as well. Another clip, obviously, one that's been getting a lot of play over the last couple of years, is her laughing about the border crisis. I mean, a weird thing to laugh at. From your research and talking to people close to her and familiar with her, does she really find these things funny? Or is that a cover for her? Is it a tell for her? Why does she do that? And do you think she can rein that in over the next 80 days?
Yeah, a lot of people make fun of her laugh, especially, Republican critics. But, it's okay for a politician to have a bad laugh or, a laugh that doesn't sound the best. If they had good laughs, they'd probably be in Hollywood. But with Kamala Harris, her laugh isn't necessarily that it's bad. It's that she deploys it at all the wrong times. There's a famous interview of her doing an interview with Norah O'Donnell of CBS. And Norah O'Donnell asks, like, what kind of vice president will you be? Are you going to be a radical? Citing all her record on all these different positions. Kamala Harris just responds by laughing at her repeatedly. And it's kind of a defense mechanism, as you mentioned. And she's sort of deployed this with reporters in many situations. Anytime reporters start yelling questions at her, her response is to kind of laugh, like, are you serious? Do you really expect me to answer your questions right now? And it really comes off looking bad. Other times, when she's dealing with opponents or on the debate stage, she'll sort of laugh, trying to shrug off any awkwardness or her inability to answer tough questions.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'm concerned about. I think that the Trump campaign and the Republican Party are underestimating Kamala's ability to perform. I do think that she's a mess and she's a disaster, and I don't think up until now she's really had to prepare for much. I think she's been able to hide behind being in the second in command, and that's what she's resorted to. But I don't underestimate her ability in a debate, because in that debate with then Vice President Mike Pence, she did a pretty decent job. We know that Joe's debate prep obviously went horribly. He spent a week at Camp David and they couldn't get him ready enough for him not to short circuit on the stage, but he also has cognitive issues. To our knowledge, Kamala does not share those cognitive issues. So I believe if given the correct prep from all the top people, because she's got the top people around her, all of Barack Obama's people are behind her now, for the most part. Do you think that she's going to be able to prepare to a level where she is going to prove people wrong, at least with her performance in a debate against Donald Trump?
I think you're right, Tommy. I think she has the ability to perform during a debate. When she's prepared, that's when things go well. And look, that's why they're already starting. Just, a few days ago, they started the debate preparations for Kamala Harris 3 weeks before the actual debate's going to happen. So you can bet that they're going to be practicing intensely hard. One example of this was during the primary, when Kamala Harris came out in the summer and basically accused, Vice President Joe Biden of being a racist because of his record in the Senate. That attack went off pretty smoothly. She had it very well prepared. She was able to deliver it in a way that had an impact with the media and with voters. Her only mistake was that she never followed it up. And for whatever reason, she just kind of made that one attack against Joe Biden and then backed away, because it apparently she had heard from either Democrats in the party or some of the leading donors that they didn't like what they saw. They didn't like the attacks. They didn't like the nastiness. And so there's definitely other points where she was unprepared for an attack, and like when Representative Tulsi Gabbard attacked her from the left, where she found herself, lost at a loss for words, really unable to respond to that line of attack, basically saying, well, the only reason I'm being attacked is because I'm so successful. Well, that didn't quite work. She didn't appear to take any of Gabbard's accusations seriously. And her campaign was pretty much over at that point, once voters realized how empty she was on the debate stage. So there's a little bit of a dual personality out on there.
Yeah, well, we've heard that the Trump campaign has brought in Tulsi Gabbard to help Donald Trump prepare for a debate, a wise decision for sure. I mean, Tulsi performed excellently against Kamala, and I think he could be a big asset to the Trump campaign, because Tulsi knows not only how Kamala works, but she knows how the Democrat Party works. And I think it's wise to bring in that kind of an expert from the other side to really prepare Donald Trump for this debate. And I hope Donald Trump prepares. This is not going to be a Joe Biden on that stage. I don't think that Kamala Harris is going to go on that stage and talk about people getting raped by their sisters, as Joe Biden did, or talk about how they defeated Medicare. I mean, I don't think Kamala is going to perform that badly. So I think that underestimating her, at least in that regard, and her ability to perform would be a misstep by the Trump campaign. But this week, the DNC, we've got Joe Biden speaking tonight. Poor guy. I mean, they're going to give him this applause, really patronizing, and I think it's going to be so cringeworthy. But we're going to flash forward to Thursday, and Kamala's going to give, her big speech, and I'm sure it's going to be well choreographed. But what do you expect from Kamala this week and from the DNC this week? How are they going to explain to voters that they put in this amateur, as you call her, they let a coup on their own candidate? Does the DNC just pretend that didn't happen? Or how do they play it? How does Kamala play it without looking like someone who really just stabbed Joe in the back?
Well, what's going to be really interesting is Kamala Harris going to be there on the night of President Joe Biden's speech? Is she going to be listening? Is she going to be, there to sort of represent the next step? He's obviously passing on the torch. Will she be there to receive the torch, or is she just going to ask him to put it in a holder and then she'll stop by later this week to pick it up? It's very clear she wants to distance herself from that very unpopular Biden record, and she kind of wants to chart her own campaign message that we'll see on Thursday, which she'll talk about, going forward and bringing everyone with her and not going back. That's sort of her big themes that she's going to really focus on. There's not going to be any hope and change, and maybe she'll leave her old phrase about being unburdened by what has been. But that's really where she's going to be at this point, unburdened by Joe Biden, who represents what has been, and then she's going to be charting her own bold message to the future and to all the Democrats there. It's going to be very scripted. Conventions are typically scripted. Everything's on prompter, so I think it'll go off relatively without a hitch. Yeah.
Last question I have for you, because you have done so much research into Kamala, who she is, the people around her. Do you think that she knew about Joe Biden's decline? I think probably pretty obvious that she did. But do you think that she's going to be pressed on that? And do you expect her to give an answer?
No, I really don't. I mean, if you remember, she was one of the first people on TV after the disastrous first debate, basically saying Joe Biden's, might have had a rough night, but he's absolutely in control, absolutely prepared. She was very good about sort of reflexively defending the president, and that sort of grew as the weeks went on after that disastrous debate performance. She really focused on not getting distracted by the potential that she might be the successor, and just did everything she could to back Joe Biden in public. But I have to imagine, and certainly her actions indicate, that she was kind of planning how she was going to react when the moment came, when the president stepped down. She was, first on the phone for a long time as soon as the news broke. And suddenly there was a whole long line of Democrats who stepped in and endorsed her for president. That doesn't just happen over a few anchovy pizzas, as they wanted us to believe. That shows a lot of preparation behind the scenes, if not by her, by people who she controlled. And it showed that she's been anticipating this moment for a long time. And when it happened, she was ready.
Well, my theory is that she didn't want Joe to drop out. She would have rather Joe Biden won, however that was going to happen, and then just become the president by default, because he would have to step down. I think she would have liked that better, because she wouldn't have had to go through an election. She's already been coronated, but that would really have been a coronation. I think she would have preferred that. But I think that when it got closer and people started to realize that Joe would not win, then all of a sudden she came around to the idea, because if she didn't run, she would never get that. It's not like come 2028, they're knocking down Kamala's doors to be the nominee. I mean, my God, she got it really by default, because she was there and she could get the money. I don't think she's anybody's first, second, third, fourth, fifth choice in that party, but that's what they got, so they're going to have to deal with it. Thank you so much for all the research that you've done. Obviously, a must-read amateur hour for anybody who wants to know the real Kamala in and out, and not the BS we're getting from the media and from her and Tim Walz. So I appreciate you, and everyone should check out your book. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Tomi. You're absolutely right. I think all Democrats wanted to just pick this up and push forward Joe Biden to the election, and then they were going to deal with the chips wherever they fell. But it became clear that he just couldn't make it across the finish line, and it was time to reset the narrative with a new candidate.
She just fell right out of that coconut tree. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Happy DNC week. I'm sure it's going to be a lively one. Great to have you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, I'm going to say something in my final thoughts I never expected to say, and the very words might sting my lips and choke me. It involves Nikki Haley, and it's time for final thoughts. Folks, I'm worried about the election. Actually, I'm very worried. Donald Trump is hemorrhaging female voters at a rate he cannot afford to. He doesn't need to win them all, but he needs to win more than he is now. And I'm not just referencing those polls when I say this. I'm talking to female voters who are undecided, female voters who don't live and breathe politics, female voters who are up for grabs. And the feedback I've been getting, well, it's troubling. They like Trump's policies, but they don't like J.D. Vance, and they don't like how J.D. Vance talks about women. They also don't love Donald Trump's personal attacks on Kamala Harris's intelligence. Now, don't shoot the messenger. I'm passing along what I'm hearing. The Trump campaign has a blind spot when it comes to female voters, and it needs work. He's fine with men, and his base is totally locked in and energized, and that is great, but that doesn't win an election. For these next 80 or so days, the Trump campaign needs to lock in on independent voters. He needs to win them over. He also needs to reach out to female voters, and he needs to do it sooner rather than later. And that's why, as much as it pains me to say it, it would be wise of his campaign to put Nikki Haley on the campaign trail as an advocate. Y'all know I don't necessarily like Nikki Haley. Her thirst for endless wars is super off-putting to me, and I am not her biggest fan. But I, in the scheme of this election, do not matter. I'm not a swing voter. I'm not an independent voter. I'm a Trump voter. But Nikki Haley appeals to the folks Trump needs to win over from Kamala, and I hate to say it. I really hate to say it, but it's the truth.
You don't need to be talking about crowd sizes. You don't need to be going on rants about her not doing an interview. You don't need to talk about, things that don't matter. It's not about her. It's about the American people. Talk to them and let them know you need their vote. Don't assume people are going to bend a knee. That is not that 20%. Their ideas are still out. What they like about Kamala is that she's being hopeful. She's talking about freedom. She's talking about a way forward. They don't want a former president talking about the past. Trump knows how to win. He just needs to do it now. He has the ability to do it.
Governor, there's someone inside the Trump campaign, and maybe the former president himself, who's watching this interview saying, wow, she's really good. Why can't we use her in suburban wherever? If he called and said, could you go here to campaign for me? Would you do it? I mean,
he's welcome to call. I have talked to him. He's welcome to do that. They are doing what they think is best, and that is his right to run the campaign he wants to run. He's chosen that. All I'm saying is I want to see them focus, and I want to see them win. We have too much at stake.
Damn it. She's right. She's very right, and I hate to say it. But the Trump campaign needs to find a way to get her on the campaign trail because she is an asset at this point. I'm happy to swallow my pride and say it. Those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow live again at 1 p.m. Eastern. Also catch full episodes of this show on Fox Nation at your leisure. Also, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I will be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.